Hi there. I'm Blanche, 67 years old, and I'm sitting in my empty house 3 days after burying my husband of 42 years. The silence feels heavier than the grief itself. Robert's chair still holds the indent of his body. His coffee mug sits unwashed in the sink, and his reading glasses rest on the side table like he might return any moment. But what hurts more than his absence is remembering the empty chair at his funeral where our son should have been sitting. Before I tell you what happened next, please let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. This story might change how you think about family loyalty forever. Let me take you back to where this all began. I met Robert Henderson in the fall of 1978 at a small bookstore in downtown Chicago. I was 21 browsing through poetry collections when this tall, gentle man with calloused hands asked if I'd read anything by Robert Frost. Those hands told his story before he did. He was a construction worker with dreams bigger than the buildings he helped create. We married 18 months later in a simple ceremony at St. Mary's Chapel. Robert wore his only suit, and I wore my mother's wedding dress altered to fit my smaller frame. We didn't have much money, but we had something precious. We had love that felt solid, dependable, like the foundation of the houses Robert would later build. Our early years were filled with 12-hour workdays for Robert and evening shifts at the diner for me. We saved every penny we could, dreaming of the day Robert could start his own construction company. I'd massage his aching shoulders each night while he sketched building plans at our kitchen table. Those were good years. Hard years, but good ones. Daniel arrived in 1985 after 7 years of trying to conceive. The doctor had told us it might never happen, so when I held that perfect baby boy in my arms, it felt like a miracle. Robert cried harder than I did in that delivery room. "He's going to have everything we didn't," he whispered, kissing our son's tiny forehead. And Robert kept that promise perhaps too well. By the time Daniel was 10, Henderson Construction had grown from a one-man operation to a crew of 15 skilled workers. Robert had built our family's reputation on quality craftsmanship and honest dealing. He insisted on teaching Daniel about hard work, bringing him to job sites on weekends, showing him how to measure lumber and use basic tools. But Daniel showed little interest in physical labor. He preferred video games and later expensive clothes and fast cars. When he turned 16, Robert bought him a brand new Mustang. When Daniel crashed it 3 months later at a party, Robert bought him another one without question. I warned Robert that we were spoiling the boy, but he'd just smile and say, "I want to give him the childhood I never had." Daniel graduated from Northwestern University with a business degree in 2007. Robert was so proud he threw a party for 200 people. Daniel moved back home afterward, supposedly to learn the family business, but mostly he played golf and dated different girls every month. He had charm, I'll give him that. Tall like his father, with an easy smile that could convince anyone of anything. Then in 2019, Daniel met Madison at an upscale bar in River North. She was 25 to his 34, blonde, beautiful, and ambitious in ways that made me uncomfortable. Madison worked in real estate and wore designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Within 6 months, Daniel had moved into her downtown apartment. Madison had a way of making subtle suggestions that slowly changed Daniel. She'd comment how unsophisticated our family dinners were, how outdated Robert's business practices seemed. She convinced Daniel that he was too talented to waste time learning construction. Instead, he should focus on investment opportunities, real estate deals, modern business ventures. Robert noticed the change immediately. Our weekly family dinners became monthly, then occasional. Daniel's phone calls grew shorter, more distant. When we'd see him, he'd check his phone constantly, eager to leave. Madison would smile politely, but never engaged in real conversation. She'd examine her manicure while Robert talked about work or scroll through social media during dinner. I watched my husband's heart break a little more each time our son chose Madison's social events over family time. But Robert never complained. He'd just look at Daniel's empty chair at Sunday dinner and say quietly, "He's building his own life, Blanche. That's what we raised him to do." Everything changed in March of 2023 when Robert collapsed at a job site. The emergency room doctor delivered the news with clinical efficiency. Pancreatic cancer stage 4, 6 months, maybe 8 if we were lucky. The world tilted sideways in that moment, and I gripped Robert's hand so tight I was afraid I might break his fingers. Robert took the diagnosis with the same steady calm he'd shown throughout our marriage. "We've had 44 good years," he told me that night as we lay in our bed holding each other closer than we had in decades. "Some people never get one good year. I'm grateful, Blanche." The next 8 months became a masterclass in love and dedication. I learned to measure medications, schedule chemotherapy appointments, and cook foods that wouldn't upset Robert's sensitive stomach. I watched my strong, capable husband shrink before my eyes, his powerful frame becoming fragile as autumn leaves. Robert never complained about the pain, but I could see it in his eyes during the worst moments. He'd grip my hand during chemo sessions and joke with the nurses even when he felt horrible. "My Blanche is tougher than both of us," he'd tell them. "She's the real fighter in this family." Daniel's response to his father's illness was heartbreakingly predictable. When I called to tell him about the cancer diagnosis, there was a long pause before he said, "That's terrible, Mom. What can I do?" But when I suggested he visit more often, he had excuses. Madison's job required weekend travel. They had dinner commitments. The hospital parking was impossible. His visits became duty calls, 30 minutes of awkward conversation while he checked his phone. Madison usually waited in the car, claiming hospitals made her anxious. During one visit, Daniel spent 15 minutes complaining about downtown traffic while his father dozed fitfully in the bed beside us. "He looks good," Daniel would say. After these brief visits, though Robert had lost 60 pounds and could barely walk to the bathroom unassisted, I realized Daniel was seeing what he needed to see, not what was actually happening. The few times Daniel came for dinner, Madison would make comments about the smell of medication or worry aloud about bringing germs back to their apartment. "I read that cancer patients have compromised immune systems," she'd say. "We wouldn't want to make things worse by bringing outside bacteria into the house." Robert never said anything, but I could see the hurt accumulating in his eyes. He'd ask about Daniel's visits for days afterward. Did he seem happy? Is he eating enough? Does Madison like her new job? My husband was dying, and still his main concern was our son's well-being. The worst part was watching Robert make excuses for Daniel's absence. "He's busy building his career," Robert would tell concerned friends who asked why Daniel wasn't around more. "That's what I taught him to do. Work hard, take care of business first." During Robert's final week, when it became clear the end was near, I called Daniel every day. "Come spend time with your father," I pleaded. "He's asking for you." But there was always a reason Daniel couldn't make it immediately. Madison's company party, a client dinner, a weekend trip that had been planned for months. On Robert's last night, it was just the two of us in our bedroom. He'd refused to go back to the hospital. "I want to die in my own bed," he'd whispered, "with my wife beside me." I held his hand as his breathing became more labored. Around 2 in the morning, he opened his eyes one last time and whispered, "Take care of our boy, Blanche. He's gonna need you more than he knows." Robert passed away at 4:17 that Tuesday morning as the sun was just beginning to rise through our bedroom windows. I sat with him for 2 hours afterward, holding his still warm hand, trying to memorize the peaceful expression on his face. He looked younger somehow, free from the pain that had marked his final months. Planning a funeral alone is a special kind of torture. Every decision requires consultation with someone who isn't there anymore. What flowers would Robert want? Which suit should he wear? Should we have the service at the funeral home or the church? I found myself talking to his photograph on the dresser, asking his opinion on details he'd never answer. I called Daniel Tuesday afternoon about 6 hours after Robert had passed. Madison answered his phone. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Henderson," she said in that bright artificial tone she reserved for me. "Daniel's in a meeting, but I'll have him call you back." When Daniel finally returned my call 3 hours later, his voice was strained. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have been there." For a moment, he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into our bed after nightmares, but then his voice shifted back to that distant adult tone. "What do I need to do? What arrangements need to be made?" I explained that I had already contacted the funeral home and made most of the basic arrangements. The service would be Saturday at 2 o'clock at Morrison Funeral Home, followed by burial at Graceland Cemetery, where we'd already purchased plots years earlier. "I'll need you to help with the pallbearers," I told him. "Your father would want his son to carry him to his final resting place." "Of course," Daniel said immediately. "Absolutely. I'll be there early to help with whatever you need." For the first time in months, I heard something that sounded like the old Daniel the son who'd once promised to take care of his parents when they got old. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, flower arrangements, and casserole deliveries from neighbors. Mrs. Patterson from next door practically moved in, helping me clean the house and organize the mountain of sympathy cards. Robert was a good man. she kept saying. Everyone in the neighborhood respected him. Friday evening, I laid out Robert's navy blue suit, the one he'd worn to Daniel's college graduation. I polished his dress shoes and selected the tie I'd given him for our 40th anniversary. Everything was ready. I'd written his obituary chosen hymns for the service and prepared a short eulogy about the man who'd been my partner for over 4 decades. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that seems designed for funerals. I dressed carefully, in the black dress Robert had always complimented, pinned his mother's brooch to the lapel, and applied lipstick with shaking hands. At 11:30, I called Daniel to confirm what time he'd arrive. Madison answered again. "Oh, Mrs. Henderson," she said, and there was something different in her voice, something apologetic but also defiant. "Daniel's been trying to call you, but your line's been busy." That was impossible. I'd been sitting by the phone all morning. "Let me speak to Daniel, please," I said, my stomach already clenching with dread. When Daniel came on the line, his voice was strained. "Mom, I have terrible news. I can't make it to the funeral today. It's Madison's birthday and her parents planned this huge surprise party. Her whole family flew in from California. I can't disappoint them." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Your father's funeral, Daniel. Your father's funeral is today." "I know. Mom and I feel horrible about it. But Dad's gone. There's nothing I can do for him now. Madison is my priority now. She's my future. Dad would understand that." I stood in my kitchen wearing my funeral dress, holding the phone with numb fingers. Through the window, I could see the hearse pulling up outside, ready to transport Robert's body to the service. "Daniel," I said quietly, "this is your father we're talking about, the man who gave you everything. And I'm grateful for that. But I have to live my own life now. Madison's family only gets together once a year. Dad's funeral is just one day, but disappointing Madison's family could affect our relationship permanently." The line went quiet for a long moment. I could hear Madison laughing in the background, probably getting ready for her party while her boyfriend chose her birthday over his father's funeral. "I have to go, Mom. The service starts in 2 hours, and people are already asking questions. I hope you understand." He hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding the dead phone, staring at Robert's empty chair at the kitchen table. Mrs. Patterson found me like that 20 minutes later and immediately knew something was wrong. Morrison Funeral Home was packed by 1:30. Robert's construction crew filled 2 entire rows wearing their best suits and looking uncomfortable in ties. Former clients, neighbors, family, friends, and church members gathered to pay their respects. The flower arrangements formed a beautiful garden around Robert's casket. I sat in the front row with an empty seat beside me where Daniel should have been. People kept glancing at that vacant spot, clearly wondering where my son was. When Pastor Williams asked if family members wanted to share memories, I had to stand alone and speak about my husband while pretending my heart wasn't shattered by my son's absence. "Robert Henderson was a man who kept his word," I told the gathered mourners. "When he promised something, you could count on it being done. He believed that family came first always. He taught our son that loyalty and respect weren't just words, but the foundation of a good life." The irony of those words wasn't lost on anyone in attendance. After the service, people approached me with sympathy and barely concealed confusion. "Where's Daniel?" they asked. "Is he ill?" I found myself making excuses. "He had an emergency," I said. "Work obligation that couldn't be postponed." Mrs. Patterson squeezed my hand as we stood beside Robert's grave. "Some children just don't understand the weight of their choices until it's too late," she whispered. "Robert was proud of you, Blanche. Don't let Daniel's absence overshadow that." That night, I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by sympathy flowers and covered dishes from neighbors. I looked at our family photos on the mantel, especially the one from Daniel's high school graduation where he's hugging both his parents with genuine love and pride. That boy seemed like a stranger now. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that feels almost insulting after a funeral. I was sitting in Robert's chair wearing his old cardigan and drinking coffee from his favorite mug when the doorbell rang at 10:15. Daniel stood on my front porch looking freshly showered and confident. He wore designer jeans and a polo shirt that probably cost more than some people's weekly salary. Behind him, Madison leaned against his BMW, checking her phone and looking impatient. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk about Dad's estate and the inheritance situation." No hello, no apology for missing his father's funeral, No acknowledgement that we'd just buried the man who'd given him everything. I led him into the living room where funeral flowers still covered every surface. Daniel glanced around with mild interest, but showed no emotion at the visual reminders of his father's death. He sat on the couch and pulled out his phone, scrolling through something while he talked. "Madison and I have been discussing our future," he said without looking up. "We want to buy a house in Riverside Hills. Nice neighborhood, good investment potential. The property we're looking at is $750,000, and we need $350,000 for the down payment." I stared at my son, this stranger wearing Daniel's face. "You want to discuss your real estate plans the day after your father's funeral?" "Dad's gone, Mom. Life goes on. Madison's pregnant, and we need to think about providing stability for our family." He finally looked up from his phone, but his eyes held no warmth. "I know Dad's will says I have to wait until I'm 35 to inherit, but there's a provision for exceptional circumstances. This qualifies." The casual mention of pregnancy caught me off guard. "Pregnant? You didn't mention this when you called yesterday to tell me you couldn't attend the funeral." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "We just found out this morning. Madison took the test this morning." Something in his voice made me doubt the timing, but I said nothing. "Daniel," I said carefully, "your father's will was very specific. You inherit your share when you turn 35, which is still 2 years away, or in exceptional circumstances with my approval as executor." "Right, which is why I'm here. This is an exceptional circumstance. We need the money now to secure our future. Dad always said this money was for my future, so technically I should have access to it when I need it." I looked at this man who shared Robert's eyes, but none of his character. $350,000? You've already calculated exactly what you want. Madison's good with numbers. She figured out what we need. Daniel leaned forward, his expression shifting to something that might have been mistaken for sincerity. "Look, Mom, I know you're upset about yesterday, but you have to understand my position. Madison's family flew in from all over the country for her birthday. Her parents, her sister, everyone. If I'd chosen Dad's funeral over her birthday, it would have damaged my relationship with her entire family." "And what about your relationship with your own family?" Daniel shrugged. "You're the only family I have left now, and you'll understand because you love me. Madison's family might not have been so forgiving." The coldness of that statement took my breath away. In Daniel's mind, my love was guaranteed, so it was safe to disregard. Madison's family required cultivation, so they took priority. "I need you to think about this carefully," I said. "Your father worked 45 years to build what he left behind. That money represents every 12-hour day, every weekend he spent working instead of relaxing, every sacrifice he made for this family. And I'm grateful for that. But what good does it do sitting in a bank account? Dad would want me to use it to build something for his grandchild." Daniel stood up and walked to the window where Madison was still standing by the car, now openly glaring at the house. "I'll give you 24 hours to think about it, but I need an answer by tomorrow. The real estate market moves fast, and we could lose this house." After he left, I sat alone among the funeral flowers, trying to reconcile the demanding stranger who just left with the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared. That child had loved unconditionally and trusted completely. This man calculated every relationship based on what he could gain from it. I thought about Robert's last words. "Take care of our boy." But looking at Daniel's behavior, I wondered if taking care of him meant something different than I'd originally understood. That evening, I called our family attorney, James Patterson. He'd handled Robert's will and estate planning, and I needed to understand exactly what options I had. James had been Robert's friend for over 20 years, and his voice was gentle when he answered the phone. "Blanche, I'm so sorry about Robert. He was a good man, and I was sorry to miss the funeral. I was in court and couldn't get away. At least someone had tried to be there, even if circumstances prevented it." I explained Daniel's visit and his demands for early inheritance access. James listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of concern or surprise. "Legally, you have complete discretion as executor," he explained. "The exceptional circumstances clause was Robert's idea. He wanted to make sure you could help Daniel if there was a genuine emergency, but he also trusted your judgment about what constituted a real need versus a want. What if I decide not to approve it? Then Daniel waits until he turns 35, as originally planned. Blanche, can I speak frankly? I've known Daniel since he was a boy, and Robert shared some concerns with me over the past few years. He worried that Daniel had lost sight of the values he tried to teach him. That conversation confirmed what I'd suspected. Robert had been more aware of Daniel's changes than he'd let on. He'd simply chosen to hope for the best while preparing for the worst. Monday morning, Daniel returned with Madison in tow. This time, she didn't wait in the car. She marched into my house wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget and shoes that clicked aggressively on my hardwood floors. "Mrs. Henderson," Madison said before Daniel could speak, "I want to discuss this inheritance situation directly. Daniel deserves what's rightfully his, and frankly, making him wait 2 more years is just spite." I looked at this young woman who'd never worked a day of physical labor in her life, who'd convinced my son to abandon his father's funeral, and who now stood in my living room making demands about money she'd never earned. "Madison, isn't it?" I said calmly. "How far along are you with the pregnancy?" Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, but there was no visible sign of pregnancy, no morning sickness pallor, no fatigue, no subtle changes I'd learned to recognize after working with pregnant women at the hospital volunteer program for 15 years. "We're still in the early stages," she said quickly. "That's why we need to secure housing now. Stress during pregnancy can be dangerous." I nodded thoughtfully. "Of course. Daniel let me get the paperwork ready. You're right that this qualifies as exceptional circumstances." Daniel's face lit up with relief and triumph. Madison squeezed his hand and shot me a satisfied smile. They thought they'd won. I retrieved 2 sets of documents from Robert's desk in the study. The first was indeed the inheritance paperwork that would give Daniel immediate access to his trust fund. The second was something I'd prepared with James Patterson's help the previous evening. "This first document transfers your inheritance to you immediately," I said, signing my name with deliberate care. $350,000 exactly as you requested." Daniel practically bounced with excitement. Madison's smile grew wider and more predatory. "See," she said, "I told you she'd be reasonable once she understood our position." However, I continued setting down the first pen and picking up the second. "I'm also signing the second document today." The mood in the room shifted as I began signing the second set of papers with the same careful precision. "This second document," I said, continuing to sign while Daniel and Madison watched with growing confusion, "authorizes the sale of the family home, the 40 acres of land that your father spent 20 years acquiring, and the transfer of Henderson Construction Company assets." Daniel's face went pale. "What are you talking about? Those aren't part of my inheritance. Those are family assets." "Exactly right," I said, finishing my signature with a flourish. "Family assets. And since you've demonstrated that you no longer consider yourself part of this family, I'm donating all of it to establish the Robert Henderson Foundation for Foster Children." I handed Daniel the first check made out for exactly $350,000. "Congratulations. You have precisely what you asked for. Not 1 penny more, not 1 penny less." Madison snatched the check from Daniel's hands, examining it like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "This can't be legal. You can't just give away family property." "Actually, I can. The house, land, and business are in my name as surviving spouse. Robert and I discussed this possibility years ago when we first noticed changes in Daniel's behavior. We hoped it would never come to this, but we prepared for it anyway." Daniel's voice cracked when he spoke. "Mom, you can't do this. This is our family legacy. Everything Dad built. Everything he worked for." "Your father built this legacy for a son who would honor his memory and continue his values. He built it for someone who would show up when family needed him most. He built it for a man who would choose his father's funeral over a birthday party." The color drained completely from Daniel's face as the implications hit him. "You can't punish me forever for one mistake." "This isn't punishment, Daniel. This is consequence." "There's a difference. Your father's construction company employed 15 families. Those men showed up for his funeral when his own son couldn't be bothered. They understood loyalty, respect, and duty. The foundation will continue employing them while building homes for children who have no families at all." Madison's voice rose to a near shriek. "This is insane. We have rights. We'll sue you. We'll contest this in court." "You have exactly the rights Daniel asked for," I replied calmly. "He wanted his inheritance early, and he got it. $350,000. He never asked for the house, the land, or the business. He only wanted money for a down payment on his real estate investment. Daniel slumped onto the couch, his head in his hands. For the first time since Robert's death, he looked genuinely emotional. Do you have any idea what you've just done? That property is worth almost $3 million? The business generates $500,000 a year in profit. I know exactly what it's worth. Your father and I built it together over 40 years. But you know what, Daniel? You never asked about any of that. You never showed interest in learning the business or continuing your father's work. You only wanted the money. I sat down across from my son, looking at him with the same careful attention I'd given to examining the legal documents. A man who chooses his girlfriend's birthday party over his father's funeral doesn't deserve his father's legacy. A man who calculates his inheritance before the body is cold doesn't understand the meaning of family. Madison was pacing now, her designer shoes clicking frantically against my floors. Daniel, don't let her get away with this. Call a lawyer. This is emotional manipulation. But Daniel just sat there staring at the check that represented everything he'd thought he wanted. Finally, he looked up at me with something that might have been recognition in his eyes. He knew, didn't he? Dad knew this might happen. Your father hoped until his last breath that you would remember who you used to be. But yes, he knew that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the full consequences of their choices. Madison grabbed Daniel's arm, trying to pull him toward the door. We're leaving. This crazy old woman can keep her guilt money. We'll make our own way. But Daniel shook her off, still staring at me. The foundation, will it really help kids? Foster children who age out of the system. Kids who never had fathers like yours. They'll get job training through the construction company, home building skills, and a chance to earn their own legacy through hard work and dedication. Everything your father believed in. Daniel stood slowly, the check still in his hand. And if I wanted to be involved, if I wanted to learn about the foundation, maybe help with it, that would depend entirely on whether you're willing to become the kind of man your father tried to raise, the kind of man who shows up when people need him, the kind of man who understands that family means something more than convenience. Madison's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Are you serious right now? You're going to beg this woman for scraps after what she just did to us? We have $350,000, Daniel. We can buy a perfectly nice house and live our lives without these people. Daniel looked at Madison, then at me, then at the check in his hands. For a moment I saw the boy who used to help his father in the garage, who used to kiss my cheek every morning before school. But then his jaw set in determination. Come on, Madison, let's go. He folded the check and put it in his pocket. Goodbye, Mom. I hope you're happy with your decision. They left without another word. I watched through the window as they drove away in Daniel's expensive car, Madison gesturing angrily while Daniel stared straight ahead with the expression of a man who'd just learned an expensive lesson about consequences. 6 months have passed since that confrontation in my living room. I sold the family house and moved into a small apartment near downtown close to the office where the Robert Henderson Foundation operates. Every morning, I volunteer there, helping coordinate job training programs and overseeing the construction projects that provide homes for aging out foster children. The foundation has already placed 12 young people in permanent housing and steady employment. These kids who never knew their fathers or lost them too young learn construction skills from the same crew that worked with Robert for decades. They earn good wages, develop real skills, and most importantly, they learn what it means to be part of something larger than themselves. Working with these young people has taught me something profound about family. Real family isn't about blood or inheritance or obligation. It's about choosing to show up for each other, especially when it's difficult. These foster children, who have every reason to be bitter and selfish, demonstrate more loyalty and gratitude than my own son showed in his final years with his father. Daniel has tried to contact me several times. I received a card on my birthday with a generic message and his signature. Last month he called and left a voicemail asking if we could talk. But each time I remember his choice at the most important moment, and I realize that forgiveness requires more than apology. It requires genuine change, and I haven't seen evidence of that yet. I did hear through Mrs. Patterson that Madison left Daniel 3 months after they got the inheritance money. Apparently, she'd been expecting access to the full estate and felt deceived when she learned the $350,000 was all there was. Daniel has been calling her constantly, but she's moved on to someone with better financial prospects. Sometimes I feel sad about the relationship Daniel and I have lost. He was such a sweet child, full of curiosity and affection. Robert used to say that Daniel had the biggest heart of any kid he'd ever known. Somewhere along the way, that heart got smaller, more calculating, more focused on what he could get rather than what he could give. But I've learned something important in these months of grief and reflection. True inheritance isn't money or property or business assets. True inheritance is character values, the ability to love without keeping score. Robert left me the most valuable inheritance of all. He taught me that real love sometimes requires difficult choices, that enabling someone's worst impulses isn't kindness, and that the greatest gift we can give our children is the opportunity to become worthy of the love they've been given. The Robert Henderson Foundation will continue long after I'm gone. It will help young people who understand the value of hard work because they've never had anything handed to them. It will create opportunities for kids who appreciate family because they've learned what it's like to live without one. And maybe someday Daniel will understand what his father was trying to teach him all along. Maybe he'll realize that a man's worth isn't measured by what he inherits, but by what he builds with his own hands and heart. Maybe he'll learn that true wealth comes from relationships based on love and respect rather than calculation and convenience. But that's his journey to make. I've done what I needed to do. I kept my promise to Robert to take care of our boy, even if taking care of him meant something different than either of us expected. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is to let them face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes love means saying no. And sometimes the best inheritance we can leave behind isn't money at all, but the example of what it means to live with integrity even when it costs us everything. What do you think about Daniel's choice? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision about family loyalty versus personal relationships? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or made you think differently about inheritance and family values, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Share this video with someone who might need to hear this message about the true meaning of family and the importance of showing up when it matters most. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that the most valuable things we can inherit or pass down aren't material possessions, but the strength to make difficult choices with love and wisdom. Until next time, take care of your family and treasure the people who show up for you when life gets hard.